Good evening, Rabbi Hoffman. How are you?
Hello, Rabbi Feinstein. Welcome to the Zoom room. We are just tidying up the last technical details to make sure we are broadcasting and ready to go.
Let me know when we're ready to start.
We are becoming live as we speak, and you are streaming, so you're on. Good to go.
Good evening and welcome to Valley Beth Shalom at Home. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and this is my opportunity to indulge a lifelong fantasy to host a late night network television talk show. So I'm delighted to have you here. This is the second half of our conversation of how to lead a Seder and how to conduct a Seder, how to share a Seder, how to celebrate the holiday of Passover under the remarkably unusual conditions that we find ourselves this year. And I'm delighted to welcome you. If you didn't get a chance, please go back and look up the wonderful presentation that was broadcast on Tuesday night by my dear colleagues, Rabbi Hoffman and Rabbi Farkas and their colleagues and friends, talking about the technical tools you might be using, Zoom and Facebook and FaceTime and other technical tools. But tonight, we're going to be talking about the content of the Seder and how to make a Seder an engaging and exciting and inspiring experience. And I've invited some of the principal educators at Valley Beth Shalom to join us tonight. I want to welcome all of you. I'm really glad that you're here with us tonight. If you're like me, you started out this week thinking, well, how am I going to do a Seder? We can't be together as a family. Families spread out all over. No one's going to be able to come. Instead of having the 12 or 18 or 20 people at my table, instead of having kids running around looking for the afikomen, it's just going to be the two of us or the three or the four of us. And family's going to be spread all over the country and all over the place. And we're going to be having to use these tools. So we don't exactly know how we're going to do this. But instead of thinking this is something you can't do, I wonder if we might be able to change our orientation and think of this as something we can do. Think of the things that we can accomplish in this extraordinary circumstance that we might not have been able to think about before. Earlier this week, my brother called me, and I haven't had Seder with my brother in years, but he called me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, we're going to try to do it online with the kids and with some friends." And he said, "Can we join?" And I thought, this is remarkable. I haven't had Seder with my brother in years. He usually goes with his wife's family. His kids are on the East Coast. And he said, would it be okay if I brought my my kids in on the call, on the Zoom conference? And it turns out that we're going to have a coast-to-coast Seder this year. We're going to have many dozens of people from all kinds of stretches of our family, all kinds of connections in our family, whom we haven't had before. There are things that this extraordinary circumstance forces us to do, which offers us opportunities now that we never had before. And that's what I'd like to think about tonight. In the world of education, we call this a teachable moment. A teachable moment is a moment, whether it's forced upon you or whether you designed it this way, a teachable moment is a moment when people are open to learn, open to experience things that are different and new, open to imagine in ways that were novel and innovative, a teachable moment. And this remarkable moment, isolated in our homes, afraid of what's going on outside, this presents a set of teachable moments. So tonight, what I'm going to ask some of our educators to join me in thinking about are the ways that we can exploit this teachable moment to make this a great Seder. Somebody posted something on Facebook the other day, which I thought was delightful. They said grown-ups are going to remember this for jobs that are interrupted, social relationships that are separated, isolation, tedium, and boredom. What are kids going to remember? Kids are going to remember, gee, I had a special time with my mom and my dad. I had a daily phone call with grandmas and grandpas. I had friends that we found new ways to connect to in all sorts of interesting ways. Kids are going to remember this year as amazing. And I think that's exactly the atmosphere and exactly the attitude that we have to take on to make this a very special year for Passover. Let's make this a Seder to remember. Let's make this a memorable Seder. Let's create memorable moments so that years and years and years from now, our children will say, oh, yeah, 2020 was the year when that's what happened, because this is going to be a Seder like no other. Every other Seder in your life sort of blends into each other. It's all the same wine and the same charoset. But this year is going to be different. So how can we make this Seder work? How can we make this Seder exciting and fun and interesting? So let's divide up our conversation to talk about different ages of kids. We're joined this evening by Abby Mars, who is the leader of our ECC, our Early Childhood Education Program, and a real important leader in the world of early childhood education here in Southern California, soon to be the chairperson of the whole Council of Early Childhood Educators. Abby has been doing this for many, many, many years. And I want to welcome Abby. Abby, tell us how we can take this moment and make it so very special for kids who are small and kids who are filled with wonder and whose eyes are filled with the surprise of something new. Abby, it's all yours.
Thanks so much. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to be with you. So Passover is one of the holidays that speaks, I think, and resonates with children most profoundly for a few reasons. One, Rabbi Feinstein mentioned, it is filled with opportunity for teachable moments, right? There are questions that are posed and perhaps answered. There are things to eat and to look at and to smell and to sing. And there are opportunities to create stories, some with fact, some with gray areas, but an opportunity for a shared experience. And when we talk about early childhood development, that is at the heart and at the core of children's work, which is their play or their way of engaging with the world. So I think our young children are going to be marvelous leaders when it comes to this year's Passover Seder. They don't come to the Seder with preconceived notions of what must happen. They come to the table open-minded, open-hearted, and they will create what will be. So I think this is a marvelous opportunity to really turn to our young ones and say to them, help us lead. Now, I have 3 children of my own. They're much older now, but we had many Passover traditions that I think will be among the most important in their own lives. And I hope, as a nice Jewish mother, that they will continue those traditions with their own families, God willing, someday. One of the things that I love most about our own tradition is the ability for people to collaborate. And so we would often assign or ask folks which part of the Seder, which part of the story would they like to talk about or share. And a 2-year-old might sing the froggy song, and a 4-year-old might lead in the dipping and then lick his fingers. And a 6-year-old might say, I'm going to recite the questions, but there's a place for everyone. So that's one of the things that I'm excited about as you begin to think about what a Seder could be like for your own families or your own extended families. Rabbi Feinstein also talked about the ability to stretch our arms across the neighborhood, across the street, across the state, and of course, coast to coast. And I think there's opportunity for sharing here. So looking into the camera and welcoming people in and creating moments that feel holy and that hopefully will stick with children, even if they can't remember the specifics, a sense, an ethos, a sense of that something was special. So let's talk about a few examples that you might consider. And I know we've created a website that has a bunch of Passover resources. So please take a look at that if you want some specifics. There are simple things to do, coloring books you can download and share, instructions on how to make special recipes in preparation for the holiday, ways to make your own kiddush cup, and all those ideas are there for you to look at. I'll share some of our other favorites, and it draws on some of the developmental milestones that we think about when we think about early childhood education. The ability to sequence, Passover Seder is all about order. So that's a great opportunity to ask a child what comes next, or to ask what is missing here. So you have a Seder plate with a missing egg, and ask a young child, what else do we need? What is missing on our Seder plate? So lots of opportunities to engage. And I think too, there are opportunities for art, expressions of art and music. And again, that is all at the heart of what we do when we are engaging young children. Ritual and routine is what helps children grow. And what I love about our Jewish tradition are the Jewish rituals that help children come to understand meaning through practice and through experience. And I suspect that this Passover Seder will have a full offering of those things.
Abby, when I was a kid, I remember the wonder of the preparation before we ever got to the holiday. First of all, there were the weeks of shopping, of course, and this large pile of food would start growing in the kitchen. And then, sometime a week or two before the holiday, my folks would start cleaning the kitchen and start planning the Seder. Talk about preparation with little kids. How can we involve little kids in preparing for the holiday, preparing for the Seder?
So your comment makes me laugh, because I always knew it was Passover time when there was bazooka bubble gum in a bag in our back pantry. Now you can get bazooka gum all year long, but for some reason, to my mother, kosher bazooka bubble gum represented the Passover experience. And so it makes me laugh when you say that. These are rituals. These are the kinds of preparation that send a cue, that send a message. Something special is happening here. We are moving from what is and what is going to be next. So the preparation in terms of cleaning, right? Thinking about chametz, what a wonderful opportunity to bring children along, sweeping and collecting and tidying up. So that I think speaks to not only the need to prepare in terms of halacha, but also to engage children where they're at. And I think preparation too comes when you set the table, right? When you are creating an inviting environment, even for folks who are virtual, to set place settings, to think about those folks that will greet you and meet you around the table, the virtual table, as it were. And I think too, an opportunity to hear from everyone, and there's preparation in that. So asking even a 3-year-old, I know you know a lot about pyramids, and this table needs to know what you know, and to think a little bit ahead of time so that the time is right. A child can feel proud about the knowledge that they've acquired, and again, that they can be a leader even in their own home at a tender age. One other thing I might mention is the idea, and we touched on it a minute ago, is this idea of storytelling. When we think about how children make order or understanding of what they're feeling, they often talk that out or work that out through story. So I would say to parents and grandparents and dear friends that this is the time to really listen to children, because I think we'll hear some interesting things in their storytelling that might reveal how they're feeling, either about what's going on in the world, what they grieve, what they miss, and maybe a cue or a clue as to how adults can support them best. So an interesting thing to think about too.
Let's pursue that for just one more moment.
Sure.
So especially now this week, or these last couple of weeks, as kids have been forced out of school,
yeah.
A lot of kids are spending a lot of time in front of screens. And parents, take a sort of back seat to that, because I let the professional on the screen entertain my kid.
Yeah.
But now we're dealing with a distinctly low-tech version of storytelling. It's just us around the table.
Yeah.
And I know lots of parents will say, well, I don't know how to tell a story. So say a word or two about embracing that low-tech, that very hands-on, face-to-face, it's just me and grandpa, or me and grandma, or me and mom and dad, or me and my brothers and sisters telling stories, and how you can make that a vivid experience.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. And in the preparation, in the creation of a table or the Seder plate, again, that's a hands-on, active experience. And we're wanting to find as many of those opportunities as we can for our little ones, given how much screen time or sedentary time they may be experiencing right now. And I think it is an opportunity for us to ignore that the camera is there or the phone is there and just be. It's awkward at first, but I think all of us have come to feel a little bit more comfortable in this kind of dialogue and this kind of engagement. And children have done that too. And so when we can almost ignore the camera and just see the people across from us, I think we'll see a lot of wonderful interaction, and I think some surprises too. The other thing to think about when we're talking about low tech is, again, thinking about the sensorial experience of it all, right? Again, young children in particular, are coming to understand their world, a holiday, an experience through what they see, what they hold, what they touch, what they smell, what they hear. And so the more that we can rely on those senses, I think the richer the experience will be, not only for a little person, but for a big person too.
Thank you so much. One of the things that little people teach us, that the kids teach us, something that you alluded to at the very beginning of your comments, is this idea of, we come to the Seder as we come to so many life moments with an idea of how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you learn from little kids is it's never how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So the attitude, I think that you said this at the beginning, and I just want to reiterate it. Whatever happens is what God wanted to happen. Whatever happened is the way it was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Because if you come to this with an idea that's got to be like this, it's got to be the way my Zeder, my grandpa did it. It's got to be the way my father and mother did it. Children have to behave the way that I expect them to behave. You're going to be kind of frustrated and kind of, you end up with a headache at the end of the night instead of a feeling of liberation.
Yeah.
But if you come with,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think all of us, we've all had an experience, right, where the Seder went on longer than perhaps we thought we could tolerate. And I would just make a pitch for not rushing through, not my suggestion, but really to meander through and be, to find yourself in the place that feels important and spend some time there. When we're thinking about what will be rich and what will be impactful, it's not how fast or how quickly or how far we get, it's the deep connection. So if you spend 10 or 15 minutes celebrating crossing the sea in song and dance, then that's a wonderful way to spend the evening. If you rush over other parts because you have spent time connecting in other ways, that's okay. So dig deep and don't worry about the long haul.
Thank you so very much. That was just wonderful. Let's move now from early childhood education, from young children, nursery school, preschool age kids, to elementary school age kids, typically between 6 and 12. And we'd like to welcome Carrie Leventhal, who is the leader of our Valley Beth Shalom It's Chaim Learning Center. Carrie, when I have kids 6 to 12, it's a different ballgame. These kids, in some ways, carry the same wonder as younger kids, but in some ways are more critical. They certainly have more experience. Tell us how we can make a Seder engaging for them.
Welcome, everyone. Nice to see all of you here. When I think about a Passover Seder for the elementary age kids, I often think about that they have so much knowledge that sometimes they don't show us. And I find that one of the things we can do is not that we don't want to follow our tradition and our rituals of a Seder, but for this particular age group, it's a really amazing way to help engage them by doing something interactive with them in the Seder. Like, for example, give them something to do before they start the Seder, like have them pack a bag and put stuff in there as if they are leaving Egypt. Have them create a word cloud of something that's a representation of the Seder itself. Giving them something that is engaging for them to share with others at the Seder. When they get to the part about the 10 plagues, allow them to act out those plagues, whether you have props to tell the different plagues with the food coloring and sunglasses and frogs. Also give them the opportunity to, during the 4 questions, to add another question to the Seder. Let them ask a lot of questions. Ask them what type of son they see themselves in, or with the 4 sons, or we could say daughters, ask them what they see themselves as, and let them see if they want to lead certain parts of it, making them involved in the Seder itself so that the timing works at their pace and allows them to give input on it. One of the things I also find is that, like I said, yes, we do want to stick with ritual and tradition, but one of the things that I find when I'm reflecting on the memories of my own Passover Seders is that we did do a lot of the traditional pieces of it. We had the traditional Haggadah, we had the traditional foods. And one of the things I started with my own children, I have 2 children that are older now in high school, but one of the things we started many years ago was on the second night of the second Seder, we would find a Haggadah that felt like it was something a little bit different for us, still traditional, but making it so that it could be a different experience for our children. And we started to do a chocolate Seder for our children. And it was a really fun thing that has become a tradition in our family, and that they continue to participate in and be excited about. This year, yes, it will be different, but we are hoping that you can bring all of these things to people in your families through Zoom. You can show them that these are ways to conduct your Seder, and giving them tasks ahead of time.
Asking questions. So one of the things that's so interesting in a Seder is when you invite questions, and you do it sincerely, so that young kids really understand that they're invited to interrupt the Seder, to slow down the ritual, that they own the ritual. And because they own the ritual, they can ask a question. What ends up happening is some remarkable digressions. So I think it's important to give everyone permission to have these digressions. There's a little statement at the beginning of the Haggadah that says something to the effect of the longer you go, the better it is. Because the rabbis who created this thing love digressions. So Carrie, in the experience you've had with your kids and with the children in the school, what kinds of questions do kids ask?
Kids ask so many different questions. They've asked, how did they really cross the Red Sea? Was that really true? Were they really slaves in Egypt? Is Moses real? Why couldn't God just pick up all of the people and have them leave? Why did they have to go through this for 40 years? And they ask, why do we have to eat this kind of food? They have so many different questions, and they ask a lot of it relating to, the Manish Shana when they're looking at that. And they just, a lot of times they really want to know what lies behind the story of Passover, and why something such an ancient story, how is it relevant to me today? How can I experience this in my own way? I'm not a slave, but how can I embrace this? What makes me free today? What makes me feel like a slave today? Really bringing in some modern things to make them understand. And you can do that with the plagues too. They can ask you, what is a modern day plague that you see today? What kinds of things in your life do you see? And really relating it to them. And that's the questions that they're asking. They want to find that way to make an ancient holiday something that from our history that we continue to celebrate. They want to make it relevant to themselves today.
That's wonderful. Thanks so very, very much. We're also joined tonight by Rabbi Avi Taff, who is our school rabbi. Rabbi Taff, you here? Let me ask you how you address these questions, okay? Carrie says that one of the kinds of questions that kids love to ask are called really questions. Like, was there really an Exodus? Did Moses really live? Were there really 10 plagues? Did it really rain frogs? Now, it's such a wonderful question because it represents a kid beginning to think critically about religion, and comparing the stories that he or she hears to the world that they know that they live in. And at the same time, they're not ready to give up the enchantment of the story. So Avi, tell us, how do you answer a really question? Did it really happen?
So this actually is an answer. Hi, first of all, hi, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for having us on tonight. Hello, everybody. Hope everyone's well and safe and healthy. This actually is a question that I posed to the dean of my rabbinical school when I was still in rabbinical school, Rabbi Artson, who you had on just a few weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
And what he would say, which I now say to my students often, is that there are different types of questions we ask. And religion asks different types of questions than, say, science, right? Science questions are how questions. How does electricity work? Right? Those types of questions. Religious questions are more why questions, meaning questions, right? So that's what I try to guide them, in a sense, to think about, okay, why? What is the meaning of the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of leaving Egypt? What is the meaning behind Moshe, who goes out of the palace, right? Did he actually go out? That might be a historical question. Those maybe we're interested in, but we're more interested, at least I'm more interested in the meaning behind it. Why did, Moshe left the palace. He sees an Egyptian man beating an Israelite man, right? He looks kovacho, he looks here and there, right? And the questions of what does it mean to look this way and that way, right? Before he acts and stops the Egyptian from hurting the Israelite. Does it mean, right? Does it mean, did he look around him to see if anyone was looking? Did he look inside himself, right? These are, again, meaning questions. So that's kind of the direction that I would guide them towards. In thinking about these questions as, okay, what do I learn from it? What is the meaning behind it? Not, did it actually happen or didn't it happen? But what can I learn from it?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. The other thing you can do especially for that kind of kid, is to put the kid into the situation. So if you were Moses and you saw this guy, this Egyptian, beating this Hebrew to death, what would you do? And if you were Moses and you were Moses and God said to you, go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go, would you go? Go ahead. What would, yeah. If you were in that circumstance, like how does one assimilate that circumstance to your own sensibilities? What would you do if you were in that circumstance?
Beautiful. And I think those are questions that we can ask our children at the table. Those are questions I've been working with my sixth graders on asking big questions, right? Not questions that anyone might feel comfortable at answering, right? Not, what does this part of the Seder have to do with? Well, if you don't feel comfortable, you may not raise your hand and try to answer it. But if you ask questions that, about life, about them putting themselves in the situation, for them and for all of us to really to see ourselves, right? We say during our Seder, right? In every generation, we have to see ourselves as if we personally left Egypt, right? What does it mean to me, to us?
Now, Avi, I'm going to ask you a hard question. You grew up in the house of a rabbi, not just a house of a rabbi. Your father's a rabbi and a cantor, and your mother's a very, very gifted Jewish educator. So you must have had some interesting Seders growing up. What kind of memories did you carry from your parents' house of interesting things that happened at Seders?
I know Abby remembered the bazooka. I remember those gummy candies with sugar, those sugar gummy. Oh, I can't, those are, anyway. We reenacted, my mom would turn the house into a tent of B'nai Yisrael. We would all sit on the floor with pillows and pretend like we were leaving Egypt. She would, literally tent the entire inside of the home with sheets draping from the ceilings. So that's one memory that's very vivid in my mind. We have this tradition, which now I've taken on with my own family, of sharing at the end of the Seder with Elijah's cup. We start with Elijah's cup empty, and everyone pours a little bit of their own wine or grape juice into Elijah's cup and shares a hope for this year, or a hope for family, for the community, for the world. And I think, especially this year, to be able to do that with our families, with our children, to share those thoughts at the end of the Seder as we welcome Elijah, who we know Elijah is the messenger who will brings peace to the world through, and hopefully through us as well, bring peace to the world. But to be able to share that hope with each other as we end our Seders, I think that's a memory also that's stuck with me, and now I get to do with my own family, my own children. So.
That's beautiful. Thank you. The other thing, just to add to that, when you do karpas, which is at the beginning of the Seder, before you eat the greens and dip it in the salt water, go around the table and ask everyone to tell one new thing that came into your life this year. Karpas is about new life, about new experiences, about the capacity of free people to experience new things. After all, the condition of a slave is that every tomorrow is exactly like his yesterday. The condition of free people is that something new. So you'll start with kids who say, I started a new grade, or kids will say that I have a new friend. And then grown-ups will talk about new jobs and new experiences. There's new children in the family. There's new loved ones in the family. You start the Seder with what's new. And then, as you said, the end of the Seder, you pass the cup around and everyone tells what a hope for tomorrow might be. And those are lovely ways of engaging everybody in the conduct of the Seder. Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Kerry. We're joined this evening by Cameron. Cameron is our youth engagement director, our youth director. Cameron, teenagers sometimes come to the Seder. Sometimes they come and they participate, and sometimes they come and they sit cynically. Teenagers are often really hard to engage in a Seder. So give us some tips, give us some guidance about how we can engage a teenager in the life of the Seder.
Well, I would say, generally speaking, we're talking about a very unique breed of humans, right? This is that time in their life where they're not babies anymore. They're not kids anymore, but they're also not quite adults. So sometimes, they're like, I don't need your help. And then other times they're like, Mommy, I need your help. So we're dealing with a delicate age, but we're also in a time literally right now where we don't know what's going on with them internally. We aren't there to see what's happening with them on their day to day. So as their parents, we're detached maybe from their social interactions. So to be completely separated from that during this time could be affecting them in ways that we may not be aware of. So having these discussions, having these deeper discussions that you maybe wouldn't have on a normal day-to-day is a good idea. And Passover is maybe a good time to bring some stuff up, to maybe engage them in ways that you wouldn't normally. I have a few different ideas. I have a document online. It's on our VBS.org/Passover page. So people can go on there and take the document that I created. And here's just some ideas. We have some teens that are extremely artistic. I have a couple teens who, as they're sitting there listening to you, they're in the middle of drawing this masterpiece. And they're like, look what I did. We're amazing. So I ask parents to ask some of their teens that are maybe into drawing, painting, or even there are some online digital, design sites like Canva.com where they could create their own Haggadah if they really wanted to. There are things that are already in place that they can just grab from, or they can actually design themselves. They can also be interior decorators of some sort, and they could create a whole new, table setting and put a runner in and add candles and be, creative in that way. Michael's is also sending so many emails. I don't know if you guys are getting those, with discounts for crafts. So if you have any kids who are super crafty, order that stuff, have it delivered. I'm sure they have 2, 3, 4 day shipping. Things are coming real fast. So, and also go to Pinterest. There's plenty of ideas for your teens to get involved in. They can get creative on there. I personally like my next idea, which is the teen that's really passionate about social action. Teens these days are so inundated with information, right? They're constantly online. They're constantly on social media. They know things before we do. And that even means some political things that are happening in the world. So, you may have a teen who's passionate about something that you weren't aware of. Ask them, are you passionate about something that you feel like you can make a difference in? You could ask your child to come with a spoken word, with a poem or a song. They could even design a physical diagram of it. You can ask them to create a dialogue with the table. They can present a statement about a group or community that's dealing with modern day oppression right now. You can even take it like a step further and design like a questionnaire for each participant, where you can ask them an issue that they're feeling most passionate about and have that discussion amongst the table. We also have a ton of teens who are really musical. I'm sure Cantor Barron can speak about this as well later, but we have plenty of kids who I know could creatively create their own songs. I even saw something online the other day for that Old Town Road song from last year. Somebody did a Purim Town Road. Check it out. It's silly, but it's a good example of a way that your teen could, recreate a modern song with a Pesach twist, if you will. What about your sports enthusiasts? I don't know how many of you know about this, but there is a rabbi on the East Coast. Her name is Rabbi Sharon Foreman. Rabbi, I don't know if you know her, but she created a baseball Haggadah. It's adorable. It's actually really, really cute. So this could be all ages actually, but you can, if your teen's really into sports, be like, check out this Haggadah. Do you want to use this? Do you want to engage us in a way that we can be, competitive, or, something that brings you back into the world of sports that I know so many of you are missing, right? We're missing so many great things right now. Baseball season, basketball, NCAA, I get it, I'm there with you. And then what about your techie whiz kids, right? Your kids that, and this is most of them actually, that are really good online, really good with gaming, whatever it may be. I know a few years ago, people were doing the emoji Passover story. So if you take your cell phone, you can send like silly hearts and whatnot. Look at the entire all the categories. You could create your own pretty much Haggadah, but let's not go that far. Maybe just your simple Passover story and do it all by emojis and have the table figure out what the story is. I mean, they should know it, but they could get more creative that way. They can also go online and create their own social media photo book. So let's say you're doing a Seder with family from, outside of the house, other parts of the country. You can have them take photos and then use a hashtag. So hashtag Feinstein Family Passover, and everyone could collect it. And then your team could create some form of a collage out of that. And then there's also a fun way of getting involved with TikTok. I don't know how many of you know that, or Rabbi Feinstein, I'm not sure if you know TikTok, but it's a fun new platform. All the kids are loving this one. Most of it's dances, these silly little 10-second dances that they learn. And that's me pretending to do it. But what if you as a family create a new one? What if you create one to Let My People Go and get that going viral? And last but not least, get your kid involved in the actual cooking. They're old enough to know how to use a knife. Why don't you teach them some of your family recipes that have been brought down through the generations? It's a great time to bond. Ultimately, Rabbi, the best thing to do is to empower your teen and to make them feel like they're being utilized, because that's the only way to really get them to love not only their family, but the Passover Seder and the story, and to feel like they belong and that they have a purpose. Oh, can't hear you.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. That's just great. Take one more minute though and talk about that last point.
Mm-hmm.
Kids want to feel like they're part, they have some control over the thing. They want to feel somewhat in charge of the thing. They don't want to be sat. When I was a kid, the worst thing was to be sat at the kids' table. There was a separate table, a little card table at the end of the grown-ups table, and they put me there. And when I turned 12 or 13, I said, "You put me here one more time, I'm not coming back." But we do that sometimes subtly, even if there isn't a separate table, by telling the kid, that he or she is not involved in the leading of the thing. How do we give kids a sense of ownership and control and let them shape the Seder experience.
I mean, involving them from the beginning, right? Maybe asking them, how do you want this Seder this year to go? How involved do you want to be? We're allowing you to make that decision. And there may be teens out there like, I don't know, I don't really care. With those teens, you say, you know what? I have a great idea. You have this skill, one of those that we just listed. I would love if you did blah, 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 right? There may be kids who are like, I know, I've been thinking of something this whole time. As long as the parent tells the teen that they want them involved, that it's important that they're involved. This is for any year, but especially this year, I feel like they'll understand that and they'll take ownership of that. It confidence booster right there.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so very, very much. Cantor Barron is with us tonight. Phil, the Seder tradition has a special musical tradition, and music has a very special role to play, not just in the Seder, but in the whole Passover tradition. So how do you use music, and particularly this year, when instead of the 20 or 30 of us at the table, is going to be 4 of us at the table, and 3 of us can't really sing real well. What do we do? What do we do to bring music to the Seder and to give it real voice?
Well, we do a very musical Seder every year, obviously, and we're going to make that happen again, even if it's on Zoom. So I'd like to give a little technical advice to people out there. I know we talked about this on Tuesday, but in case you missed it, the audio part of the Seder is really important. And I highly recommend, unless you like cacophony, and cacophony is fine when everybody's singing at the same time. The problem is, even though we feel like even tonight on Zoom, we're sort of in sync, we're actually a few milliseconds out of sync. So if we were all to sing something at the same time, it might not sound that great. For some things, if we're singing Dayenu, that's great to do it all at the same time. But I highly recommend everybody mute except the people who are doing the singing. Now, the best way to do that is to assign musical parts of the service to different people on Zoom, just like you might be assigning different parts of the story and so forth, which would be a great way to organize it. Do the same thing with the songs. Go through your Haggadah, and if you can, have the same Haggadah at each place where people are Zooming in. And if not, the VBS Haggadah is online and available to you. And then let people know which pieces of it they're responsible for. And then everybody else, except for those moments where you don't care if it sounds kind of messy, have people mute and let one particular family lead that part of the singing, okay? So again, try to use the same Haggadah if you can as you go through. The other thing is we have put up on the VBS website links to about a dozen or more songs that you can go to ahead of time to get familiar with the music. And if you're not familiar with the music enough to bring it into your Seder, you can simply play it right off of our website. So that's another way you can do it. We've chosen nice versions of the songs that everybody can sing along with. The other thing is you can, as Cameron was saying, you can bring your own songs into the Seder. You could do parodies like we do on Purim. You can also use modern songs. In fact, some songs, not that modern, but for instance, from my childhood, a song that we always do, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. So songs about freedom and justice, things from the civil rights movement and so on. Other songs that you can bring in, any kind of current song that talks about the qualities and the issues and the values that are presented at this time, Pesach, you can bring into your Seder. And so maybe we'll end the evening tonight all singing together. You'll get an idea of what a messy version of the song sounds like.
All right, we'll do that. Thanks. So we've talked with the educators, and I do appreciate their contribution tonight, about how to make a Seder engaging for little kids, for older children, for teens, how to bring a little music into the Seder. Let's take a moment now and talk about how to engage adults. The most important thing to remember is why. And as with so many Jewish rituals, we get so caught up in doing the ritual, we forget the why of why this ritual is there. The Passover ritual is an answer to a mitzvah, to a commandment, an imperative that occurs in the Torah. The Torah says, "V'yigadata lebincha bayom hahu," you will tell your child on that day, "Ba'avur zeh shasali Adonai b'tzeiti mimitzrayim," because of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. And from that, the Mishnah extends that to the imperative, "B'chol dor vador, chayav adam lirot et atzmo kilu yitzav mitzrayim," that each of us has to see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt. Now consider that for a moment. It's an amazing imperative. It's not enough to remember the event as if it were a historical event. It's not enough to commemorate it. We actually have to be there. We have to take historical events and make them personal memories. Now, why is that? Why such a radical thing? Think for a moment, how for a moment? Everything at the Seder is exactly for that. What is the Seder after all? It's our last night in Egypt. It's our last night. We were slaves. Our parents were slaves. Our grandparents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. And we had no hope. No hope except that our children would be slaves and maybe have it a little easier than we did. And suddenly this fellow Moses comes along and says to us, "Pack your things, we're leaving." And tonight is our last night. The blood is on the lintel. The screams are outside. We are told to remain inside. That's right. It's the first social distancing, social isolation is Moses's commandment to the people of Israel. Stay inside your house because outside it's dangerous. We're inside, wondering what the hell is going on outside, wondering if we're going to actually leave Egypt tonight, wondering if this could really be true or if this is just another false hope, another fantasy. And tonight we're eating that meal, that last meal. I had a friend when I lived in New York as a student. Our friend said, "Come to the Seder dressed for a trip and bring a suitcase. And in the suitcase, put something that you're taking out of Egypt tonight." Now we got to the Seder and it turned out that all the chairs of his dining room disappeared. And we spent the night sitting on our suitcases. And sometime during the course of the evening, he asked each of us to open the suitcase and show the artifact that each of us were taking out of Egypt tonight. For some, it was photographs of family. For others, it was books. For others, it was an heirloom passed down by a parent or a grandparent. We're leaving tonight, and we're going to sit at the table like our ancestors did, eat the meal that they ate. We're going to eat dry, tasteless, flat bread, because that's what slaves eat. We're going to eat the bitterness of maror, because that's what slaves experience. But tonight, it's different. The flat bread is going to be transformed over the course of the Seder from slave bread to the bread of redemption. And the bitterness is going to be tempered by the sweet charoset, because liberation is coming. And we're going to sit at the table and wonder, can this be real? That's how we're going to do it. Now, why are we going to do this? Because this story is the master story. And the imperative of Pesach is to tell the master story, to assimilate it, to make it ours. This story is the essence of our Jewishness. You ask a Jewish person for their autobiography, for their resume, and the first line on the resume doesn't say where I went to high school or college, doesn't even say where my parents came from. The first line on the resume says, "I was a slave in the land of Egypt." You will not understand me. You will not understand my values, my politics, the way I spend money, the way I eat, the way I walk the world, unless you understand that I was once a slave. That I was once a slave. And if you know that I'm a slave, you'll understand a lot about me. Number one, you'll understand my social ethics, because over and over again in the Torah, we're told you will take care of the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. You will protect the vulnerable. You will give voice to the voiceless, because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Because we will not allow anyone to be rendered socially invisible. We will not allow anybody to be rendered socially insignificant. That's who we are. And second, it's the essence of our faith. we Jews have lived in history and have learned from history that while history may be filled with ample moments of persecution and oppression, there is a fundamental pattern, a pattern, a teleology, a progress, a process in history, which leads to freedom and leads to justice. And it is our obligation to be on the side of history. And that's what the Seder is really all about. In the VBS Haggadah, which you'll find on the website, we'll talk about that at the end, you'll find a page that I added to the Seder. I call it the Haggadah's secret missing page. I gathered a bunch of the verses from the Torah that say, do something because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And when you put them all on one page, you end up with a clear picture of the kind of people this ritual, this storytelling is intended to create. A people who understands a role in history to bring freedom and justice to a very difficult and cruel world. That's why we do the Seder. And if you understand that, it's about telling the story, about teaching those ethics, about understanding how those ethics shape the way that we look out into the world and see the world, then as you begin to prepare your Seder tonight, as you begin to put together, start asking yourself, how can I communicate that to the people who will be sitting at the table? Now, here's a radical statement. I'll give you two radical statements from a rabbi. Number one, take the Haggadah as the beginning, not the end. It's the beginning of the conversation. As Abby said so wonderfully, invite kids to digress and tell stories. As Kerry said, invite kids to ask questions. As Avi pointed out, take a ritual and make it your own. Turn it inside out, but make it your own. Don't be afraid. This is yours. You own this. You don't have to do the Seder. In fact, this year you have the best excuse not to do the Seder that your great-grandfather did. Do it in a way that everybody walks away going, now I understand who I am and what's expected of me in the world. Tell the story in a manner that teaches the people at the table. And the third thing that a Seder does, it changes our ethics, it changes our faith, and it opens us up to a moment of wonder and of celebration. The most beautiful moment in the Seder for me is always that moment when we cross the Red Sea. You just imagine this story. At the beginning, we're standing there watching Pharaoh's armies trooping down the hillside. We see the sea in front of us and Pharaoh behind us, and death is certain. And then all of a sudden, a miracle comes and redemption comes our way. And we end up on the other side. Now, whether it was like Cecil B. DeMille imagined it or whether Moses just knew how to get through a swamp, doesn't matter. Because the important part of the story is what happens on the other side. We take a breath. It's our first breath of freedom in 5 generations. We take a breath. I had an uncle who was a survivor of the concentration camps. And at that point every year, he would tell us the story of how he was liberated from Auschwitz. He was liberated the last night in the concentration camp. The barracks were nailed shut. And all night, the men in his barracks heard the sound of equipment and shooting and fighting. And they were sure that in the morning they would all be killed by the Germans. And they heard big bootsteps coming up the ramp of the barracks early in the morning. And then a giant boot crashed down the door. The men thought this was their last moment of life in the world. And they heard a man speaking Yiddish with an Oklahoma accent. And he was an American Army sergeant who had come to liberate them. The first breath of freedom is what we're trying to get to. And that's the Dayenu moment. That's what the whole song of Dayenu is. Give me that breath, God, and everything else I'll say thank you for. So get to that moment and enjoy that moment and celebrate that moment. That's what this is about. And this year particularly, with the terror outside and the isolation of our families, this year in particular, it's important to be able to celebrate a little bit, to have something to say Dayenu for, a blessing, a miracle. The other thing I'll tell you is you're supposed to have 4 cups of wine at the Seder. You can have Manischewitz. That was my father's tradition. He loves Manischewitz. I prefer a Cabernet Sauvignon. and there's an awful lot of good wine out there to celebrate with. So for adults, take some time and prepare your Seder. You prepare the meal, you prepare the house. Take some time to prepare the storytelling about how you want to convey this year. Pass out parts. Let people at your table, particularly children, take a part of the Seder. Get the little kids to do the plagues. They love frogs. Get the teenagers to talk about Pharaoh and evil and Moses speaking truth to power. Get the elementary school kids to talk about the meaning of miracles. Ask people at the table, adults, to bring a piece of literature. Ask teenagers to bring song lyrics. Ask kids to bring pictures. Let everybody bring something so they can contribute to the telling of the story, and they'll own the story. Remember, your job as a leader of a Seder is not to lead the Seder every year for the next 100 years. Your job is to teach a new generation to lead it, so that when it's your turn, you can sit back and watch them lead it. So give them parts and let them lead. Ask them to bring stuff to the Seder, reflections, song lyrics, music. Let them bring artwork, let them bring games, let them bring toys, let them bring their own way of telling the story. And most of all, tell the story. You'll find lots of resources on the Valley Beth Shalom website. We've made reference to it tonight. If you go to vbs.org, there's a page of all kinds of Passover stuff. As well, you can tune in on Seder night. We're going to do 3 different virtual Seders. That's right. You could take your computer, put it on a pillow at the end of the table, and there will be one of us ready to lead your Seder with you. Or you can just watch us and then take it and do it yourself. There'll be a Seder for young children, a Seder for elementary school age kids, and a Seder for teens and adults. Or you can take all the material we've talked about and make your Seder really special. Before we finish, I want to thank all the educators for joining me tonight. Thank you for sharing your hearts and your souls and your time. Kenner Barron, take us out with a song tonight, a song of the miracles of Passover. And I'll wish all of you a happy and a healthy and a sweet and a good Pesach. Be kind to each other this year. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Everybody unmute. Ilu Hotzianu mi Mitzrayim Hotzianu Mitzrayim Dayenu
Chag Sameach, happy Pesach.